Hey, yo, Classics fam. Today we are doing Virgil's Aeneid, Book 8, and that's what we're going to be doing. So let's get right into it. When last we left our beloved hero Aeneas, he was in the underworld, being escorted out of it by his father. I just want to recap this quickly. Because I'm going to come back to it, if not in this lecture, then in the next lecture. There are two gates of exit from the underworld: the Gate of Horn and the Gate of Ivory. The Gate of Horn is where the true visions, dreams, shades pass through, and the Gate of Ivory is where the false ones go through. And Aeneas' father, Anchises, leads him through the Gate of Ivory, which is weird, or at least noteworthy, at any rate. Okay. So let's talk about Book 8. We're going to touch on a couple of things today. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about the setup um, uh, of the war that's coming, because we've heard multiple prophecies about this war that Aeneas is going to have to fight. And then I'm going to spend some time discussing the shield of Aeneas in comparison and contrast with the shield of Achilles, which Virgil obviously wants us to be thinking of as we're looking at the shield of Aeneas. But I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so Aeneas comes out of the underworld. He leaves Cumae, which is in southern Italy, sails around the coast to central Italy, which is where Rome will be founded, and comes to the river Tiber, where he is greeted by the river god Tiberinus, who, of course, immediately says, "Well, I don't want you to have to row upstream. Let me stop the flow of the river, so it'll be easier for you." Again, this is part of Virgil's program of establishing Aeneas's um, uh, uh, association with destiny, right? Even the gods are behind him. The local gods and the great gods are all behind Aeneas, with, of course, the exception of Juno. Though, if you've read all the way through to Book 12, you will note that she comes around also. Um, Sorry, spoiler alert. Yes, Aeneas wins, and there's a kind of a happy ending. We'll talk about that more when we get to Book 12. So Aeneas sails up the Tiber River, and as he comes up, he falls, or his boat passes in through this region that has 7 hills on either side of the river. Well, this to a Roman audience would immediately indicate Rome, because Rome is built among 7 hills. So just as we had the number 3 in Homer, symbolizing completion or completeness, so we have the number 7 in the Aeneid, symbolizing both the city of Rome as well as Aeneas's destiny. Um, but I mean, again, just like we saw back in the episode at Carthage, we are made to feel, there's Virgil does his best to make us feel a sense of tension, because the people who live amongst these 7 hills are Greeks, and we know the Trojans and the Greeks are enemies, so maybe this is dangerous. But it's okay, though. It's okay. Don't worry, because these are good Greeks. These are okay Greeks, because they are, well, their king is called Evander, and they come from a region of Greece that's called Arcadia. Now, Arcadia is in the northwestern part of the Peloponnesian Peninsula, so it's northwest of Sparta. Um, and why that is telling is because of the associations of Arcadia with myth. Arcadia is mountainous and wooded, and was never it was never heavily populated in the ancient world. I mean, there were some towns and villages and things, but it was generally, uh, rural by modern standards. And so that's one aspect to it. The other aspect to it, of course, is it's a traditional birthplace of the gods Hermes and Hermes' son Pan. Now, why is that? What am I getting at with all these things? When we talk about Arcadia, what we're talking about is a place that, both in sort of popular imagination, but also in the record of myth, are associated with places where people lived in close, one might actually say magical harmony with nature itself. Okay, so it is associated with living one of the ideals of up to one of the ideals of Stoicism. I know I used this last class, but I'm gonna use it again just to refresh your mind. But it's the Stoic idea of the simple life, right? The fewer things that you have, the more humbly you live, the less you're going to desire, the less you're going to want to have. If you live in the city, city life is about consuming things and how fancy your clothes are and how nice your toga is. What edition of the iPhone you have, what kind of car you drive, and so. But the more that you acquire, the more that you need to acquire because you're always having to outdo somebody else, and desire breeds further desire. So the simple life is the best way to live. And what that means for standard Roman morality is that the best life is spent in the countryside, on your farm, uh, living in a simple dwelling place, and not desiring all the things, all the trappings of city life. So Evander's good because he exemplifies, he typifies that. We know that immediately because just when Aeneas kind of rolls up in his ship, they're in the process of celebrating a festival, a religious festival. So they're already, like right out of the box, before we even meet any of these people, they're already pious. We already know that they're pious because they're celebrating a religious festival. Who is this religious festival for? It's for Hercules, who, as Evander tells the story, um, rescued the Arcadians from this evil monster called Cacus, whose name basically means poopy. And so they set up this religious celebration for him. Now, so here's an interesting question. Okay, so all right, so there might be this myth that exists about Hercules, but the fact of the matter is that Virgil was author. If he's trying to establish the Arcadians as pious, he has a number. Like it could be a festival for Apollo. It could be a festival for Minerva. It could be a festival for Venus. There's a million, not a million, literally, but there's a ton of gods that he could have chosen from. So why does he choose Hercules? Why is Hercules the god in particular? Because Virgil has a larger thematic strategy here. He wants us to see Hercules as a precursor of Aeneas, while at the same time he wants us to see Aeneas as a precursor to Augustus. So Hercules parallels Aeneas. Hercules is the prototype for Aeneas, and Aeneas is the prototype for Augustus. What are the clues for this? Well, first of all, after the sacrifice and the festival is over, Evander invites Aeneas to stay in his home. So again, hospitality. He's a hero just like the heroes from Homer are heroes. And when he takes him to his palace, number one, his palace is very humble. It's not a big fancy thing. He's not going to Trump Tower. It's dirt floored and one story and very humble room. So that again immediately locates Evander in the realm of stoicism and the simple life, and not desiring to have all of the ostentatious trappings of wealth and power. And then when he shows Aeneas to his room, he says, "Come sleep in this room. This is the same room that Hercules slept in when he traveled through here." Okay, so what do we know about Hercules? Well, for one thing, we know that he's half divine. His father is Jupiter. His mother was a mortal woman, just the same as Aeneas, whose mother was Venus, and whose father was mortal, Anchises. So he's half divine. So that's one parallel right there. The second parallel that we have between Hercules and Aeneas is that they are both hated by Juno. They're both hated by Juno. Hercules is hated by Juno because he's the offspring of not Zeus. We're in Roman literature. Jupiter's philandering, his fooling around with mortal women. Aeneas is hated by Juno, of course, because he's a Trojan, and Juno hates all the Trojans because she lost the beauty contest. So there's a strong parallel there between Hercules and Aeneas. Well, guess what? There's also or not the hated by Juno part so much, but the half divine thing also applies to Augustus. Because Augustus's dad, Julius Caesar, after he was assassinated, at his funeral, was then proclaimed to have been divine. So that makes Augustus himself half divine. So there's that strong parallel, right? And then there's a third thing that Virgil's audience would have picked up on, which maybe for modern audiences we're less aware of this because we're not quite so familiar with the iconography of ancient gods and heroes. But the ancient audience would have known that when Hercules passed through what would become Rome one day and killed the monster, when he slept in the household, he would have slept on a lion skin. Why is this? I don't know how familiar you are with the myths surrounding Hercules, but Hercules famously had to complete 12, what are generally known as 12 labors. Okay, so the 12 labors of Hercules. They were more or less death traps that were set up for him by his evil cousin and Juno. They were all death traps, and most of them involved having to kill monsters. The Hydra is a famous one, but the very first labor that bringing Cerberus up from the underworld, that's another one of them. In fact, originally he only had to do 10 labors, because Juno has him sold into slavery to his evil relative king. I think Eurystheus, I want to say is his name. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think that's his name. But they both wanted him dead, and so they said, okay, well, you can get out of slavery if you do these 10 tasks. And each, like as I mentioned, each and every one of them was designed to be a death trap for Hercules. Anyway, he ends up doing all 10 of them, but they accuse him of having cheated on 2 of them, because along the way Hercules acquires a little buddy who helps him out. And they say that was cheating because so Hercules needed his little buddy friend to help defeat the Hydra, for example. So every time Hercules cut off a head of the Hydra, his little buddy jumped in and put a torch into the stump because the Hydra's heads grew back. Even if you cut it off, the Hydra's head would grow back. But they figured out if you cut it off and then you cauterized the neck stump, the head wouldn't grow back. So they said you cheated on that one. And then there's another one that they cheated on too. So we ended up having to do 12 labors, which makes sense in terms of larger mythography because 12 is a multiple of 3, and 3 is the magic number in myth, generally speaking. But the very first labor that Hercules did was the first beast that he killed, the first monster that he killed, was called the Lion of Nemea, 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 or the Nemean lion. And the thing about this was that the lion was a threat to the people of Nemea and the surrounding countryside because the lion's hide was so tough it couldn't be penetrated by any human weapons. So it was basically, they couldn't kill it. So just rampaged, eating people and livestock and sheep and other things. Okay. So what does Hercules do? Hercules does battle with the lion. They fight all day. And then Hercules' regular weapons are useless. So what Hercules does is he grabs a tree and he rips it out of the ground. And he beats the lion over the head with it until the lion passes out. And then he takes the lion's claws and he flays the lion's skin with its own claws, because that's the only thing sharp and strong enough to actually pierce the skin of the lion. And then thereafter, Hercules always wears the lion skin. So if you look at ancient iconography, vase paintings, or murals, or mosaics, or statuary of Hercules, he's not all the time, but most of the time he's depicted wearing a lion skin. Sometimes he's depicted in women's clothes. That's a different story. But the audience would automatically know that Hercules would have slept on his lion skin. And the reason why I bring this up is because when Evander introduces Aeneas into the Hercules suite of the palace, he says, "Here for you to sleep on is a Libyan bear skin." Okay. So right off the bat, the fact that he's given an animal skin to sleep in immediately evokes ideas of Hercules, right? But this bearskin comes from Libya. Well, what else is in Libya? Carthage is in Libya. So this brings us back to the whole idea, like this is all evoking this parallelism of Hercules as prototype for Aeneas, Aeneas as prototype for Augustus, right? So Hercules' first great conquest is the lion, the Nemean lion, right? Aeneas, of course, has had his great conquest with Dido, and Rome, of course, will one day completely destroy Carthage. So just as the lion skin is a symbol of Hercules' heroic conquests, so the bear skin is symbolic of Roman conquest, Roman military conquest. So it's another nod to the greatness of Rome. Okay. So Evander's son is Pallas. Evander tells Aeneas, take Pallas off, teach him the art of war, and please let him come back alive. So Pallas is Evander's son. So now Aeneas not only has his own son, but he now has this surrogate son that he has to be pater to as well. And then as Evander's talking about the possibility of his son not returning alive, he passes out because he can't stand the thought of his son not coming back alive. Okay. So Evander's people are facing a war with another tribe, another local tribe. And so Aeneas takes his Trojans and allies them with allies with them with Evander's army. Okay, so they're going to go. They're going to go off to war together. Evander's too old to go, but Pallas is going to go with Aeneas, and Aeneas is going to teach him how to fight. Um, Spoiler alert. Yeah. Um, uh, but the problem is Aeneas doesn't have any armor. Why doesn't Aeneas have any armor? Because Dido burned it all. Okay, so this is supposed to evoke ideas of Achilles lending his armor to Patroclus, and then Patroclus getting killed, and Hector taking the armor, and then Achilles' mother coming and saying, "Don't go back into battle till I bring you new armor." We went over the shield of Achilles. We're going to review it a little bit today as we look at the shield of Aeneas itself. Actually, this might be a good point to do it. In this instance, so if you remember back to the Aeneid, or I'm sorry, if you remember back to the Iliad, Thetis, Achilles' mother, went off to Hephaestus and supplicated him to make new armor for her son, at which point Hephaestus said, "There's no need to supplicate me. I owe you a favor. I'll do this willingly." Okay, situation is a little bit different in the Aeneid because now we find a later development in the myth where Venus is in fact actually married to Vulcan. So, okay, right, Greek names, Roman names, dealing with the same gods. Okay, Venus is Aphrodite in Greek. Vulcan is Hephaestus. Okay, Vulcan is in like volcano, right? Because the Romans reimagined the myth that Vulcan's smithy shop was in Mount Etna, because Mount Etna was smoking all the time. So it's still to this day an active volcano. And so they just sort of so the Romans, when they adapted Greek myth, they didn't do it 100%. They changed a few things along the way. And if you're interested in that, take the myth class. So what I'm getting at here is the basic relationship. In the Iliad, the relationship between Thetis and Hephaestus was not sexual, it was social. Thetis had treated Hephaestus as a guest, and therefore they have a bond of guest friendship, of hospitality between the two of them. In the Aeneid, it is a sexual bond because at this stage, Venus is now married to Vulcan. Kind of an odd couple in the sense that Venus is the most beautiful of all the goddesses, and Vulcan is traditionally the ugliest of all the gods. You can make your guesses as to why that match was made. I have my theories. So when Thetis goes to Hephaestus in the Iliad, he says, "No, I owe you a favor anyway. I'll do it willingly." When Venus goes to Vulcan in the Aeneid, she says, "I come asking a favor for my son." And the key word in that is "my," because it's not our son. Because Vulcan ain't the dad of Aeneas. So Venus has to do her thing in order to get Vulcan to make the armor. And what is Venus's thing? Venus's thing is seduction. And so you see in Virgil's descriptive terminology, it's fire that comes into his bones. It's a burning sensation. It's the same descriptive vocabulary that we saw back in Book 4 with Dido. You know, Dido burns with her love for Aeneas. She's struck with a wound. Her love is an illness, right? She's got this madness. In other words, she's irrational. She's sick. She's crazy. and she's got this. Well, let me put it this way. I'm sorry, my favorite classics joke. Dido's burning sensation, as is Vulcan's burning sensation, they're both venereal in nature. Yeah. So Vulcan is seduced into making the armor for Aeneas, and he does, and he makes the shield. And again, we have another example of ekphrasis. Virgil clearly wants us to be thinking about what we know from Homer. We're supposed to be thinking about the shield of Achilles here, because we know what went on the shield of Achilles. So let's remember, let's rehearse what went on the shield of Achilles. It was essentially a version of the cosmos, as the various poets imagined it who worked on the poem of the Iliad at the time. So there were two cities. We remember the city of peace and the city of war, the two different ways that humans interact with one another. We do things having agreed on a general social contract that keeps the peace for everybody. Hence, we have things like law, as we see in the city of peace on the shield of Achilles. Or we do things violently to one another. We attack one another in order to enforce our authority over each other. Then we also had scenes of nature, the natural world. And we saw in our scenes of nature that there are kind of two dynamics that go on. We can cultivate the natural world so that it grows our crops and it feeds us and sustains us and nourishes us. But at other times, nature does what nature does, nature things, and we can't control those things, and they often manifest themselves in deadly ways towards us as humanity. Hurricanes, floods, in the case of the shield of Achilles, lions attacking, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. But then the picture of the shield ends with notions of rebirth. And so the whole thing forms this kind of cycle. I know it's not a perfect circle, but deal. It's this idea that the order of the cosmos plays out in patterns of birth, growth, decay, death, rebirth, growth, decay, death, rebirth, growth, decay, death. So it's a cycle, right? It's this endless cycle. The shield of Aeneas is a bit different, because what Virgil describes as being on the shield of Aeneas is not quite so new agey, shall we say. Aeneas's shield basically bears on it, I should say. Not basically, but does. It depicts, surprise, surprise, the history of Rome. So this is essentially, in the books that we've read from the Aeneid, this is the third time that we're getting this. We got it in book 1 when Venus went off to Jupiter and said, "Hey, why is my son being shipwrecked? He's supposed to survive and reach his destiny." And Jupiter says, "Oh, what? I wasn't paying attention." "Oh, don't worry, your son will be fine. He's going to go off and found this land, and his descendants will be great." We saw it again in the underworld, where Aeneas is talking to his father Anchises, asking about the as yet unrecycled souls who are going to be the great people of Rome in the future. And Anchises runs down the list of all these great names of future Romans, up to and including Augustus himself. Right? So this is the third time that we're getting this history of Rome. And indeed, as you can expect, who's right in the middle of the shield? Augustus. And it's a very specific scene of Augustus, because it's Augustus at a particular historical moment. It's Augustus at the Battle of Actium. The Battle of Actium. So, all right. So let me back up here for a minute. I'm going to give you a little bit of Roman history, just for a moment. I know I talked about some of this already. So, after Julius Caesar's great conquests, when he returns to Rome, the Senate doesn't know what to do. So, Julius Caesar gets these other two political heavyweights to enter into a political alliance with him. Their names are Crassus and Pompey. They don't like each other, but Caesar manages to broker a kind of a working agreement between all three of them, and it lasts for a little while, but it doesn't last forever because powerful men are power hungry, and Pompey goes off and tries to wage a war. He's older now as a general, and he loses. Crassus does the same. He also loses, and that leaves Julius Caesar at the top, which makes the Senate nervous because they're afraid that he's going to declare himself a king and they're going to lose their power, so they assassinate him. That's a long story made very short. Okay, so that's generally known as the first triumvirate. That's Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus. Julius Caesar was at one point married to Pompey's daughter. He divorced her, though. Maybe Cleopatra had something to do with that. Julius Caesar had a close alliance with Cleopatra and the Egyptians, a close alliance that had resulted in a son. So this is generally known as the first triumvirate. Okay, so this word triumvirate looks like a fancy word. It's not really that fancy. The trium part, that just means three, as in triad, triangle, etc. The vir part of this just means man, as in like virile. And so it just means a group of three men. So Pompey, Caesar, Crassus are the first triumvirate. Now, the problem with this nomenclature is that a triumvirate was, in fact, actually an officially appointed body under the Roman Senate, and these guys were never officially appointed as a triumvirate. So some Roman historians get all kinds of itchy if you call this the first triumvirate. It's been called that since forever, so I don't see any need to change it right now. But just keep in mind that this was a behind closed doors pact between powerful politicians. So after the assassination of Julius Caesar, the Senate again is in the position of not knowing what the hell to do in order to keep peace in Rome. So at this stage, they do actually officially appoint a triumvirate. So this we refer to as the second triumvirate, even though this first one wasn't really officially a triumvirate. But you get the picture that I'm getting after here. De facto. Now I feel like I got to give you these terms too. When something happens and when legislators enact something that goes officially into law, that's de jure. That's the term that we use. Okay, de jure means by law, basically, more or less. So jurisdiction is a word that we get from here, jurisprudence, or indeed it's even related to the word justice. But when things happen without being officially enacted into law, these things we refer to as de facto. Okay, so a lot of times people in power or bodies that have power, they can do things and they can pass them as law, and that makes them de jure, or they can just go ahead and do them anyway, and that's called de facto. So coming back here to our triumvirates, this is a de facto triumvirate. It was three dudes running Rome, sharing power it didn't last all that long, but but it did. It was there. It was a thing. And then this second triumvirate is a de jure triumvirate. In other words, it was officially appointed by the Roman Senate. Who were the three people in the second triumvirate? Well, we can start with the richest man in Rome, a guy who made his money off of grain speculation. Romans always needed grain. I mean, at this stage, so we're talking here about the mid 30s BCE, around about 30 BCE. I'm not gonna weigh you down with dates because I'm not gonna examine you on them. So if you are interested, you can look them up and do further reading. But at this stage, Rome is over 1 million people, and in a city of that size, of course, food is an issue. So they always needed grain, and that's how Lepidus made his millions. And then you have a guy who came to power in Rome in the more traditional way, which is to say through his military prowess. He was Julius Caesar, one of Julius Caesar's chief lieutenants, chief, kind of his, one of his commanders in his army. His name was Mark Antony. And then the third guy in this triumvirate was the kid, a name that you should already have in your notes because I've already given you this. But the young 18, 19-year-old kid that Julius Caesar adopted as his heir. Remember, Julius Caesar doesn't have any suitable, legitimate Roman heirs. Obviously, his kid by Cleopatra would not be accepted by the Romans because he's not fully Roman. So it's his grandnephew Octavian. Of course, we know that Octavian will become Augustus after all is said and done. All is not said and done yet, though. So the Romans, the Senate decides that the best way to do this triumvirate is just to carve up all of the Roman territories into chunks and give each of these three guys a particular region to rule over. So the central slice of the pie, which includes the province of Gaul as well as Italy, but not Rome, not the city of Rome itself. The city of Rome itself officially stays under the governance of the Senate. But the rest of the province of Italy, as well as Gaul and chunks of Germania, go to Octavian because his father, remember, under Roman adoption customs, doesn't matter if it's your biological dad or not. Once you're adopted, that's your dad. So that's where a lot of his dad's conquests were. So that's his inheritance. He also gets the majority of Julius Caesar's army, which will be important. On either side of Octavian, the Senate thought it wise. I think this is the theory behind it. But they thought it wise to kind of to balance the power. So while Octavian gets that central prime slice because he's got Italy, on either side of him, Mark Antony is installed as governor. That means the province of Iberia, that's modern-day Spain, Portugal, and then on the other side of him are the eastern provinces, the Greek provinces, and then out into the Near East. Poor Lepidus is, not poor, that's the wrong term for him because he was filthy rich, but unlucky Lepidus was sent off to govern the shifting sands of North Africa, which is a wasteland because the Romans laid waste to it 100 years prior to it. So there's not really a whole lot there to govern or to enrich yourself with. And most of the tribes that you're ruling over are nomadic and basically ungovernable anyway. So Lepidus doesn't like this arrangement, so he tries to invade. He brings his army, his little private army, to invade Italy by way of the island of Sicily. Again, I've mentioned this to you before. Never a good idea. You don't want to invade Sicily in the ancient world. It's like trying to invade Russia in the 20th century. It's not going to work. So he's defeated by Octavian's forces. Octavian brings Lepidus back to the city of Rome. And, you can think of all the myriad ways that Lepidus might have been punished by Octavian. You can think of execution or exile or imprisonment or whatever you want to think. That's not what Octavian does. Octavian publicly forgives him and grants him with the highest religious office in Rome, the Flamen Dialis. Wow, what a great guy Octavian is. How nice he is. How merciful he is, right? Well, until you understand that holding that particular religious office means that you can never leave. In the middle of Rome, there's the sacred grove. You can't leave. You're not allowed to leave. So it basically puts him under house arrest, is what he does, right? But it's a great PR move. And Octavian is nothing if not great at PR. He has some really good advisors. And then so that leaves Octavian and Mark Antony. You can see where this is going. They're going to fight one day. Mark Antony goes off to Egypt and he strikes up an alliance with Cleopatra, very similar to the same kind of alliance that Julius Caesar had with Cleopatra. In fact, Mark Antony actually marries her, which is a bad move. I talked about Octavian being a master of PR. This is bad PR back in Rome for Mark Antony to marry Cleopatra. Why does he do it? Well, he does it because he knows that Egypt produces more grain than anywhere else that Rome has access to. Egypt was because of the annual flooding of the Nile, Egypt was the most reliable source of wheat in the ancient world. And yeah, I mean, why do you think the Egyptians were around for 5,000 years? Because they had a steady source of food. So Mark Antony goes off thinking that if he gets this alliance with Cleopatra, he can send all this grain back to Rome, and then the people will love him, and they'll get rid of Octavian, and then he'll be the only guy in charge. Unfortunately, part of Octavian's PR machine included, by this stage, though didn't always, but by this stage, there were a lot of well-placed Romans who were once pro-republic, anti-emperor, but who have kind of switched their allegiances as the political winds have shifted. So there are a lot of guys who once were on Team Mark Antony, who have, by this stage, have shifted over to Team Octavian. And one of these guys is a senator, an orator, a lawyer, probably the greatest lawyer the world has ever seen. His name is Cicero. Cicero, after the marriage of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, delivers a series of orations to the Senate that are not explicitly about Mark Antony, but anybody who can read between the lines knows he's talking about Mark Antony. They're called the Philippics. They're supposed to be about Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon, but anybody who knows he's talking about Mark Antony. So public opinion shifts against Mark Antony, and this makes actual warfare inevitable. So, to make a long story short-ish, Octavian and his forces, which are led by some of Julius Caesar's old commanders, he defeats Mark Antony in a naval battle that's called the Battle of Actium. I think 34 BCE is the year for it. But again, I'd have to look it up to be absolutely sure. But I'm pretty sure it's 34 BCE. And Antony dies, and of course, famously, Cleopatra kills herself as a result. So now, not only is Octavian, cock of the walk in Rome, he's also brought all of Egypt into the Roman sphere of influence. Right? He's now all of North Africa. above the Sahara is under Roman control, and almost all of Europe at this stage. Romans never quite get a handle on Germania, though, which makes me proud. But they could never quite get that border all the way secure. That remained a thorn in their side for the remainder of the empire. And in fact, it's German tribes that end up sacking Rome in the end anyway. But that's down the road. You don't have to worry about it yet. So when Octavian comes back, when he gets back to Rome, he's declared the emperor. The Latin word is imperator. But that's the Latin equivalent of our English word emperor. And he changes his name from Octavian to Augustus. Augustus means the one who is to be revered, right? Augustus is a word that you would apply to your father, but also to a god, right? The one to be obeyed, the one to be respected, right? The one to be revered. And then he launches into the second phase of his PR campaign, which brings us back to this theme of patronage. And this is where Augustus's PR kicks into high gear, mostly overseen by this guy, Maecenas, whose name I gave you last time. And so it's now Octavian is this wealthy patrician kid, did things that wealthy young bros do, orgies and parties and drunkenness and, that kind of thing. But now that he's imperator, it's time to clean up that act, right? So now it's time to refashion his image in terms of the pater, the pater nationalis, the pater Romani, the father of the Romans, right? And so he has to project this image of being this pious, upstanding, morally virtuous. Where's my notes on Stoicism? Here they are. Morally virtuous, and also, as we saw with Lepidus, forgiving, generous kind of father. So he has to recast. So when you look at statues of Augustus that are from his lifetime that were produced for display in Rome, you'll find that he's generally portrayed very simply, just as another senator. He's got a toga on, very humble. So occasionally he might be portrayed as a soldier, right? But not to any grandiose effect. These are all things that speak to Stoic virtues of simplicity and sacrifice and humility, right? It's different when you get farther away from Rome. When you get out to the eastern provinces, you find that the public images that he sanctioned to be displayed of himself, they look more like the statues of Alexander the Great, right? Because like the people out in the east, they don't have a problem with a king. There's no problem. They have no problem with a king. They've always had kings. They know what a king is. It's no big deal, right? Whereas in Rome, they don't have kings. That's why Julius Caesar was assassinated. He wanted to make himself a king, right? In Rome, we got rid of our monarchy way back when, in the 500 years ago, 600 years ago. We have a republic, right? Yeah, we have an emperor, but yeah, still, it's still a republic, like they're kind of pretty good at lying to themselves on that respect. But you can't use the word king, because to use the word king is basically an act of treason in Rome. Because, as I said, Romans don't have kings. They have a senate and a republic. So they think. Anyway, looping all the way back around, let me come back here to the Shield of Aeneas and wrap this up, as I have a Zoom meeting starting in like 5 minutes. Whereas the Shield of Achilles over here gave us a larger picture of the cosmos and the cycle of life and things that we all experience as human beings, no matter where we are or when we are, the Shield of Aeneas is much more narrowly focused on simply the history of Rome. And the portrayal of Augustus is right smack, and it's Augustus at the Battle of Actium. So it's Augustus in the battle that made him emperor, his decisive victory. And Virgil makes a point of telling us that it's right in the middle, smack in the center of the shield, he says, is Augustus at Actium. And he's there with the great gods and with his household gods. So he's both this picture of larger destiny, larger global destiny, but at the same time, he's also humble and supporting his household traditions, right? The senators, as Virgil says, the senators and the populi, the people, unwashed masses, they're all there in support of Augustus. So he's universally supported by all of the divinities. He's also universally supported by all of the Romans too, right? So yay, Augustus. Go Augustus. So what am I getting at here? On the shield of Achilles, in Homer's text, like you can read the descriptions of the scenes in order. You can try to reimagine how they are arranged on the shield. There have been many attempts to kind of adapt over the history of European art to make versions, pictorial versions of the shield of Achilles. But at the end of the day, the text never says that something is in the center. Even when we get to that very last scene of rebirth, of the children dancing, the text does not say that that's in the middle of the shield. Can you argue that it's implied? Maybe you can argue that it's implied if you want to, but the text doesn't actually say that. Because there's nothing central to I would argue, my counterargument would be that there's nothing really central to the Homeric worldview presented on the shield. Birth, growth, death, decay. We all experience it. We all go through it. It just recycles. It comes back again, right? But there's nothing. It's not that growth is more important than decay, or that death is more important than birth. Like there's nothing central in it. It's all part of the same process, the same cyclical process. So the shield of Achilles gives us a larger view of the cosmos. Where I wrote it twice on the sheet, but oh well. Save on ink. But it's all these things that are part of a process. The shield of Aeneas, on the other hand, basically tells us that Rome is the cosmos. Because remember, Virgil knows that we know our Homer. He knows that as he's describing the shield of Aeneas, we're going to be recollecting what we know about the shield of Achilles. So we're going to be thinking about the shield of Aeneas being a version of the cosmos itself. Well, as it turns out, on the shield of Aeneas, the bounds of the cosmos are co-equal with the bounds of Roman territory. Anything outside of that might as well be in the primordial soup. And what's right at the center of all of the cosmos? Augustus. So Rome is the center of the universe. Augustus is the center of Rome. Rome is the peak of all human destiny, and the greatest of all, of course, is, where's my other sheet? I keep throwing these things around. Not Hercules, not even Aeneas, but Augustus. That's the culmination of human destiny, of human progress. Rome will last forever, and Augustus himself will become a god one day. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Book 8. It's a lot to say about Book 8, almost an hour. I'm going to do Book 12 shortly, and I'll post it to you. So, miss you, love you, bye.